Color is a visual effect. It is employed in order to underscore an emotion that a filmmaker is trying to elicit from an audience. There were any number of transformational technologies and creative processes that Technicolor came up with over its 107-year history. From 1934, Technicolor Dye Transfer absolutely had a monopoly on the best motion picture color there was. Bulk release printing was facilitated with Jaws and with the original Star Wars. I look at all of these innovations as tools to facilitate the creativity of filmmakers and storytelling process. We see examples of great achievement in that regard.
Hi everyone, the Technicolor Creative Studios Academy welcomes you to the 5th episode of the Learn, Create and Grow webinar series. My name is Annabelle and I work as a training coordinator at the Technicolor Creative Studios Academy. For today's webinar, I will be your host and it is fantastic to find so many of you present here today. We'd appreciate it if you remain with us until the end of the live stream to win some awesome prizes. So far in the series, we have covered tech anim, animation and VFX, 3D digital matte painting, and lighting. Now we'll get a look at the Matchmove department. I want to welcome you all to this session where you will get acquainted with Matchmove and its significance in VFX. The webinar will demonstrate how Matchmove can be used to add CG elements, recreate 3D cameras, and add or change backgrounds and foregrounds. In addition, we will demonstrate camera moves and rough blocking. We will also take you through various processes involved in 2D tracking to camera solve, undistorting the plate, and finally match moving it to finish and finalize the shot. I'd like to briefly introduce you to the Technicolor Academy before I go any further. The Academy not only uncovers us to the fascinating field of creative technology up close, but also provides artists with the opportunity to learn more about VFX and animation at no cost. Another interesting fact is that the Academy is not limited to a single location or discipline, but rather to a wide range of disciplines, and we hire people from all over the world. The courses and sessions, which are led by some of the best and most experienced instructors in the industry, are typically spread over 4 to 14 weeks. While you are enrolled in the Academy, the artists and students are trained and evaluated through interactive and virtual classes with practical assignments and consistent feedback. Let me introduce our speaker, Mohit Walia, before we get to the main event of this webinar. Mohit has worked on some crown projects including Dune, Justice League, The Matrix, Fast and Furious 9, Venom, Ghostbusters and Wonder Woman, to name a few. He has 13 plus years of work experience in both FX and Matchmove. He has spent years perfecting his art and technique, which he will be sharing with you today. He enjoys traveling and sampling different cuisines from around the world. His area of expertise is set supervision using LiDAR scanning and meshing. Matchmove has provided him with the in-depth knowledge of cameras as well as methods for capturing nuanced experiences into digital knowledge. You can ask us questions in our chat box so that we can give you additional assistance. Any queries you may have about Matchmove as well as any difficulties and experiences are welcome. Mohit and team will answer your questions as soon as they come in.
Hello everyone, my name is Mohit and I'm a trainer at Technicolor Creative Studios. So today we are going to discuss Matchmove. What is Matchmove? Matchmoving, also known as camera tracking, is a major aspect of modern visual effects. Using this process, visual effects artists are able to convincingly insert computer-generated elements and characters into live-action plates, thus giving the illusion that everything is living in a consistent three-dimensional space. In every modern action movie, as well as many non-action films, the first step is to track the camera in order to add spatially accurate visual effects. Here's why Matchmove is so important. Matchmove is the first step in the VFX pipeline. The incorporation of 3D data into live action would be impossible without it. In recent years, advances in softwares and the machines used to run them have made match moving more affordable and efficient. If it's Iron Man in the Avengers, or let's say Dragon in the Game of Thrones, you need a virtual camera that moves exactly like the live action camera in order to make accurate and appears as if the CG models are living alongside the actors. In two-dimensional match moving, features are tracked only in two-dimensional space without accounting for camera movement or distortion. In live action footage, this can be used to place the image on a television or to change the advertisement on billboard. By using three-dimensional match moving, a virtual camera can be then created using the information generated with a 3D animation application. The earliest VFX use of Matchmove was done by our studio ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. ILM had an early 2D tracking software system called MM2, was tested on movies Hook by Amblin Entertainment in 1991 and Death Becomes Her by Universal Studios in 1992. MM2 was not an automated tool, but a manual 2D nudge tool, where the artist would keyframe position changes by hand. ILM would later use this as the basis of one of the earliest 3D tracking systems, which was used for Jurassic Park by Universal Pictures in 1993. VFX has grown to a very modern and realistic stage in our present time. Here's an example of film that had totally new and challenging approach to VFX and Matchmove. The film is Ant-Man by Marvel Studios. As far as Matchmove approach is concerned, there are multiple camera setups from the multiple angles along with macro lenses captured from a different perspective. To achieve Ant-Man's scale, lenses and framing were experimented with a wide lens and a medium shot. The character would look too large compared to surroundings and environment. It was much more effective to show his size by putting him in a relative large space. For example, pulling back from within the bathroom to see a tiny man in a huge bathtub. Then the process ended up by using a 100 mm macro lens and capture the set really like we would capture a full-sized set. Thus, to be a good Matchmove artist, one must be knowledgeable about 2D spaces, 3D depths, parallax, real-world scales, and orientations, as well as everything about cameras, lenses, and lens distortions. How do we complete a Matchmove shot? The first step is to import the footage into the tracking software. Moving forward, we add a good number of 2D tracks in all the depths and corners we can. Our next step is to calculate the camera solve and then the lens distortion if necessary. Using this method, we can create a virtual 3D camera movement to show how the camera moved during the scene's shooting. Now in Matchmove, we sometimes get lidars of the location where the particular scene was shot, and sometimes we need to make geometry for the shot if required. As I mentioned earlier, when we get the lidars for a particular shot, we use that geometry to line up the frames and then survey our 2D tracks. Then the camera solve. As a result, we get a correct scale, position, orientation, and the movement of the virtual camera at the time it was taken. Now in Matchmove, we sometimes get lidar of the location where that particular scene was shot, and sometimes we need to make geometry for that shot if required. With the Academy, you will learn the best tricks and techniques and how to work with the industry professionals. And the best part is, not only do you learn, but you also do some practical exercises with the team members in similar shots to those who do in the industry. Moreover, you will learn from the industry professionals like HODs, supervisors, and the team leaders. Academy classes are available both domestically and internationally. We are currently in Australia, London, the US, and India. And this way you get to interact and connect with everyone and everywhere. Learning and exploring the different perspective of the industry from around the world is the best way to get a better understanding of the industry. Here at the Academy, we will do the same for you. Over to you, Annabelle.
Mohit, that session was fantastic. Let's take a brief break and play a round of trivia before we continue, so you can compete to win some awesome prizes from Technicolor Creative Studios. All you have to do is listen attentively to the questions and type your responses as quickly as you can into the chat box. had an early 2D tracking software system. What was the system called? What was the first feature-length animated movie ever released? Hint, it was a Disney movie. In Matchmove, what are the lens grids used for? What is the difference between prime lens and zoom lens? In Matchmove, we sometimes get LiDAR scan models to match in our shots. What does LiDAR stand for? Your responses have been posted, and our crew will email the winners shortly. Please be sure to check your inbox. Since we all know more about what the Academy has to offer, anyone who wants to learn more about how to apply can click the link in the upper right corner of your screen.
Thank you, Annabelle. Let's proceed with the webinar.
So this is the shot we're going to take for our webinar. But before that, we're going to analyze the shot properly. So in this shot, we see the camera is following the runner. On the other hand, if we see there is a lot of parallax happening in the scene. As we see, the background buildings are moving in the opposite direction to the foreground. Here we see that these buildings are moving on this direction while the foreground is moving in this direction. So while analyzing the shot, let me explain you how we analyze it. So while analyzing, we see the camera is moving from this direction to this direction. But as we see, we should always know how the movements are happening in the foreground, midground and background. I have marked this blue area which will be called as foreground. If we switch on the red area, this will be known as midground. Also, if we see the area marked in green will be known as background. So guys, after analyzing the whole shot, let's move on to understand the user interface of the tracking software, and I will show you guys how to start the track and complete the shot. Hi everyone, so this is the software we are going to use for our Matchmove webinar. This software is very well known as 3D Equalizer. Now we are going to simply import the plate we are going to track by browsing it and importing it to our tracking software. After importing your plates, the first thing a Matchmove artist should do is analyze your footage properly. This gives you an idea of overall shot, how you need to plan it accordingly. So, after importing the plates, let me show you the user interface for the software. Here we go to the orientation mode, which is also known as three-dimensional space. So here in the left hand side, you can see some tools and scripts which are going to help us further in 2D tracking and camera solving. So let us now further move to the basic environment. Here on the left hand side is our object browser. Here is the camera sequence we imported, and on the right hand side is the attribute editor. In the attribute editor, after importing the image sequence, the first thing we do is we change our first frame to be exactly the same as it is in our image sequence. In the object browser, we see the camera lens. Here, we can input the provided values for film back width, film back height, focal length, and all the other values provided. Now, coming below, we see an attribute known as lens distortion. Standard degree 4, classic LD model, radial fisheye degree 8, anamorphic degree 6. The most commonly used are radial standard, anamorphic standard, and classic LD. In 2D tracking, the few important things to keep in mind are the 2D points should be very precise. You should have 2D points in all the depths of the plate you are tracking, and there should be minimum 7 visible 2D points in all the frames. Put your 2D points on the corners, else in the middle of the spot you are tracking. You can simply add a new point by pressing Ctrl button on your keyboard and clicking left click on your mouse. As you guys can see, I took the corners of the white strip. While tracking, it becomes difficult for us to see the track points as it is red in color. Area we are tracking is almost the same color. So we changed the color of our points from red to blue. By changing the color from red to blue, now we can easily see our 2D point if we are tracking it properly or not. Now we can easily continue the point from the frame we left and continue at the exact corner we started. We can check this by simply pressing page up and page down button on your keyboard. Here now you can continue your track till the last frame visible. After this, you can simply click on the End Point tab on the left bottom corner of the screen and end that 2D point. After ending your point, you can scrub your timeline and check if the track point is sticking good or slipping from its position. Let us now take another good visible corner and start tracking it. After taking this point, let us again change the color from red to blue so that it makes us easy to track. Now after tracking few frames, we see that the corner we were tracking gets blocked by the runner's foot. Here we simply end the point and continue again after a very good visible frame. Here we can again check the point if it's in the same position by pressing page up or page down button on your keyboard. After this, we drag this point to the last visible frame and end it. Let us find another good corner to track, and we will track it in a similar way. Here I found another good corner to track. We will be tracking it the same way by changing the color to blue and precisely tracking it to the visible last frame. Here in the FG, we will try to put maximum points as possible because the runner's foot is impacting to the ground. And we are going to replace this ground. So this area needs to be very tightly tracked. So we are going to track this point to the last visual frame and end it. After this, let us scrub the frame range and find another good patch to track. Now again, I found this very good white patch to track, and we're going to track it backwards in the frame range. Here is how we are going to do this. Let's take a new point at the last frame and go to the attribute editor and see the direction box shows us automatically backwards. We again change the color to blue so it's easily visible to track. Let us start tracking it and continue to the last frame and press end point to the last visible frame. Now let us scrub the frame range and find a patch where we will track it by adding a track point at the center of the patch. Now similarly we are adding few 2D points to the center of the white spots. This helps us understanding if the point is slipping to the frame range and we can edit it to bring it to the center. We will similarly track this point to the end of the visible frame range. Here, while I am tracking these points, you see I am again and again analyzing the shot and finding the best spots I can track for getting the best results. While tracking these points, you guys can see there are few frames where my 2D points are slipping. So here I am trying to edit these frames manually by pressing the arrow keys on my numeric keyboard. The other way to edit the frame range where the 2D points are slipping from its area is going back to the frame where your 2D point is in correct place and then by clicking the gauge marker tab on the left bottom corner of the screen. We will check this point precisely by scrubbing the timeline back and forth so that there are no jumps in this 2D point. We will then again continue to track till its last visible frame. Changing the track area box and search area box gives information to the point that it needs to track and search only to that defined area. We should always continue the point at all the visible frame range and end it only at the last visible frame. Let's again scrub the timeline and find another good spot to track. As I earlier told you, we will be adding as much possible tracks in the foreground area because we need this area to be tight. So this reminds me to tell you that you should always know the scope of work in your shot and then you can give your best output. Now as we move forward with tracking the 2D points, we see that some areas are not visible properly. In that case, we can open the Image Control tab and change the color of the plate so that those points are much more visible for tracking. Now as we see, the whites and blacks are much more visible and we increase a little bit of blur so that the pixelation reduces. Now after color correcting the footage and giving it some blur, we can now track it much more easily. Let's again start tracking this white patch by taking a new 2D point at the corner. We will again track this point very carefully and precisely to its last visible frame and end it by clicking the Endpoint tab. Let's change its color to blue as we are keeping it on all arc points in FG. Let's again scrub through the timeline and find another good patch to track. This white spot looks good to track and we will track it backwards from the last frame range. By tracking this point, we see it is slipping and jumping from its place. So for that, let's change the size of the tracking area box and search area box. We will continue doing this and track it to the last visible frame and end it. Now quickly, let's find one last patch in the FG and track it. Here is one good patch which is visible but with lots of obstructions as the runner is running here in this track. So we will be tracking it at all the visible frames by the same method we were tracking it and editing it and ending it to the last visible frame. Here now after adding a few 2D points in the foreground, we will be looking forward to cover some area in the background. We see this building in the background having a lot of padlocks as the camera translates. So we will add a point in the corner of the building. Same way we will be adding some more points in the other areas of the background. Trying to add 2D points in the corners and centers of any patch here gives you the best result and 2D points sticks properly. Understanding the concept, adding these 2D points in foreground and background is very important. When we add these 2D points in all the depths, This helps the camera to understand the 3D depth and the parallax properly. Let's find some more areas to add 2D point in the background. This whiteboard area seems good to track, so we will be adding a 2D point here. Here's how you will be giving more and more information to the camera by adding these 2D points. So, while after adding few points in the background, now we move forward by adding few points in the midground. This area of the field has some black patches we will be trying to track. So let's add some 2D points here. While adding these 2D points in the midground, you need to be very careful as we see there is some rotation along with some translation happening. We will keep editing and tracking these points here till it sticks properly. As I have told you, these 2D points should be very precise because these 2D points are the ones who will be giving all the information to the camera to understand the translations and rotations it has to capture. As we are tracking this point, we see there is a parallax movement in this area, so it's becoming difficult to track it. So we are going to be very careful while tracking this point. Let's try to change the tracking area and search area box simultaneously and keep tracking it. While doing this, there are still some jerks and slides here, so let's adjust them per frame by arrow keys on the numeric keyboard. We will keep doing this till we track this point properly. After this, I am ending this point when the runner blocks this black patch, and we will now continue this point on the next visible frame, the same way we have been doing this earlier. So now let's press page up and page down button to see if we have continued this point at the same patch in the center. Looks like we have finished tracking this point, so let's end it. Here, now I'm going to import some 2D points I have already tracked and show you how I covered all the areas of the shot. We simply go to the object browser, right click on the points tab and import the 2D tracks. This will add the 2D points I had earlier tracked. Now as we see, there is a good number of points in the shot. Let's move on to solve the camera. For solving the camera, we need to go to the Calc tab and select Calc All from scratch. This will give you a camera solve for the shot we have been adding the 2D points. And by collecting all the information from these 2D points, we will see the 3D predictions, the green ones over these 2D points. This deviation browser shows you how good your camera solve is with all the badly tracked 2D points spiking high on the deviation browser. As we select this spike in the deviation browser, we can see there are some jerks on the 3D predictions and the 2D tracks. So for correcting these, there are many ways. We will be first trying to calculate the focal length and some distortion for this shot. So simply by going to the deviation browser, let's adjust the focal length and calculate it. For this, we will be opening the parameter adjustment window and start calculating the best focal length we can achieve. After the calculation is over, let's transfer these parameters to our camera solve. So let's calculate and see the change in focal length. As we see, there is a minor change in the result. After this, we will be now adding the distortion parameters and recalculate the result. Now we see here after calculating the focal length along with distortion, we have achieved a good result. and reduce the spikes in the deviation browser. So, after doing all these calculations and achieving a good camera solve, let's move on to the orientation window and see how it looks in 3D. As we see in the result, there is a good depth of the points we added and the smooth linear camera movement. To understand the points, how they look in the different depths, we can simply go back to the basic window and select all the points and go back to the orientation window to see if they are in proper depth. Doing this vice versa, we can check if all the points have come in the proper depths, as I am showing you here. We are trying and selecting all the FG points here in the ground, and then we will be going to the orientation window to check if these ground points are in proper depth or not. As we see here, the ground points to be in the proper depth, but orientation looks wrong. After this, we can go to the lineup window and check if the orientation of the shot is proper or not. We will now click on the View tab and click on Show Horizon Line. Now, as we see, the horizon line is in the center of the window, which seems wrong. Now, before correcting the orientation of the shot, I am going to add a 2D point in the ground in Fire BG. This will help me setting the orientation of the shot in later stage. After adding these 2D points, let's calculate our camera solve, adjusting the focal length and distortion. So we added this 2D track which will give us a position of ground in Far BG, through which we will be able to align the orientation properly. This will also help us in the final orientation of the scene. Let's keep editing this point properly so that it sticks properly. By tracking this point very carefully, we will be ending this point at the last visible frame. And then after this, recalculate the result by adjusting the focal length and all the distortion parameters together. And then transfer the result to refine our camera. Let's check if we have a good number of points or not. We can check this by clicking on the Windows tab and then selecting the timeline editor. In this timeline editor window, we can check if all the frame range has minimum of 7 track points or, as per me, bare minimum of 10 track points. If there are less number of points in this timeline editor, marks that area red. But for us, it's not showing red because we have added a very good number of 2D tracks. Let's now move on to the orientation window and start orienting our scene. As we see here, our 3D points are showing that some of the points are pointing up in the Y translation above the ground level, which is wrong. So for correcting this, we will move the basic window and select 3 points which are on the ground and then move back to our orientation window. Now we simply click on the Edit tab, select Align 3 points to the axis plane. After doing this, we see that the 3D points are below the grid, which is our ground. But this time, we will only select one point on the ground and align it to the origin. Now, we can see all the points are aligned to the grid with correct orientation. So, finally, after taking the shot, solving the camera, and calculating the distortion, now we will save the file and start exporting the project to Autodesk Maya. Now as we remember that we have calculated the distortion, we will have to export this undistorted plate from our tracking software so that we can use it in Maya to complete the shot. For this, we will click on the 3D tab and select Run Warp. This will open a new window where we simply give the path to a folder and then render out our undistorted footage. Now, after all this exporting and render, we will open Autodesk Maya and import our camera to set up the scene. Now, after importing the MIL file, the first step here is selecting the camera below the scene and locking it so that we mistakenly don't change anything in the camera attributes. Now we will delete the image plane which came along with our camera import and create a new image plane and attach our undistorted renders to it. Now as we see, everything is properly imported and we are good to move on to our next step. In our next step, we are going to create a ground plane and orient our scene properly to the ground. We scale up the ground plane so it looks correct in our camera view. We then rename it and put it in a layer and name it Ground Geo. We did this because if any other department wants to work on this file, it should be clean and easy to understand. After completing the orientation, we move forward to our final step of scaling the scene. We do this by simply importing a 6 feet human character and then scaling the whole scene so that it matches the scale of the person running in the shot. By doing this, we have achieved the real world scene scale. Thus, here we complete our shot achieving the last step. Now let me show you the final output what can be achieved after completing the match move for this shot. On the left hand side we can see the plate we started working on, and on the right hand side the final output we achieved after completing all the match move, lighting, compositing and rendering.
Signing off here, and we'll be waiting for you all who wants to start with the first step of VFX pipeline as a match mover. Over to you, Annabelle.
Wow, what a brilliant webinar! I'm sure our viewers learned a great deal about Matchmove. I appreciate each and every one of you attending this session today. We invite you to follow us on social media, and if you have any other queries, don't hesitate to contact us using the information displayed on the screen, and we will get back to you. A recording of this webinar will be made available to stream on YouTube. Please follow our channels to get updates and access to more of this great content. Watch out for new episodes and feel free to share it with your friends and others who might gain something from the series. See you again soon for the next episode of Learn, Create and Grow.